Just like a firecracker show on the 4th of July, let's go out with a big bang. Welcome to part 2 as we go out with all guns blazing. Let's start with our first quote. It's Genndy Tatarsky. He was creator of an excellent cartoon Clone Wars series. This is from StarWars.com, February 2004. The Q&A, it says, hey, what was George Lucas's reaction to his cartoon? He said, it's been really great. He said it is Star Wars, which is what we set out to do, to create really cool action cartoons that fit in the Star Wars story. He's been really happy about it, especially because his kids like it too, which is important. Well, that's nice. George liked it because his kids liked it too. You don't hear that much, do you? Hey, you know what? A lot of these quotes, they're not that hard to find, folks. Don't believe me? Check out your 1994 reprinted copy of Splinter in the Mind's Eye. And George Lucas, who wrote the preface, and I'll just read a section of it. He said, after Star Wars was released, it became apparent that my story, however many films it took to tell, was only one of 1,000 that could be told about the characters who inhabit the galaxy. But these were not stories I was destined to tell. Instead, they would spring from the imagination of other writers, inspired by a glimpse of the galaxy that Star Wars provided. Today, it is an amazing, if unexpected legacy of Star Wars that so many gifted writers are contributing new stories to the saga. So many gifted writers. Well, amen, George. I agree with that. Wait a minute. But George already had a 7, 8, and 9, right? So I guess the EU is never going to be considered canon. Let's address that with some quotes. First quote here. This is from a TV Guide interview with George Lucas, November 2001. It's called Matters of Life and Darth. It's on pages 24 and 25 of the TV Guide. They asked him about the sequels. Is there going to be a 7, 8, and 9? And Lucas responds, there's nothing written. It's not like I'm completing something. I have to start from scratch. The idea of episodes 7, 8, and 9 was more of a media thing than it was me. What does he mean by media thing? Well, in the forward here, it says, he also reiterated, this is the author of the interview, he said he also reiterated that there would be no third trilogy, despite what he said years ago about the whole thing being a trilogy of trilogies. He said it was a joke. The Rolling Stone printed the idea as fact. After episode 3, there will only be printed Star Wars stories from now on. Now, another thing I found was a copy of Cinescape magazine interviewing George Lucas on July 2002. And in the preface to his comments, in the hard copy of the magazine, it reads, and while rumors persist that an outline for a third trilogy exists, and in parentheses is a quote made by George Lucas made in passing to Rolling Stone, which was then printed as a fact. The director insists that the continuation of the saga will only be in the form of licensed properties, which was, of course, the books. Now, I cannot find this Rolling Stone issue. It had to have happened earlier on, but it was just a joke, he said, a trilogy of trilogies. There is no third trilogy. Now, we know there is going to be one now because Disney wants one, and George is happy to provide some ideas of where they can go. But he never intended to have a 7, 8, and 9. Don't believe me? Well, let's go with some more quotes here. This is Entertainment Weekly, issue number 785, interview with George Lucas. It's called Dear Mr. Fantasy, that was the title of it, and the interviewer was Mark Harris. And he says, you're pretty definitive about not making the once-rumored third Star Wars trilogy, episodes 7, 8, and 9. And George Lucas says, I'm not going to do it. I'm too old. I've got other movies I want to do. And I don't want anyone else to do it. Well, he doesn't own it anymore, so he doesn't get to say. But he was adamant. He didn't want it. That's another thing. Why couldn't Disney just make their own set of movies? Why does it have to be 7, 8, and 9? We don't know. We don't have an answer for that. Now, what about one more? George Lucas. Interview with the Los Angeles Times. Geoff Boulter is his name. 2008. George Lucas says, there really isn't any story to tell. He says, it's been covered in the books, and video games, and comic books, which are things I think are incredibly creative. Los Angeles Times. It's been covered in the books, video games, and comic books, which are things he thinks are incredibly creative. That's interesting. 7, 8, and 9 doesn't need to be made because there are books, video games, and comic books that have covered it. It's already been covered. This is the Los Angeles Times, May 2008. I don't know what else you want there, folks. Anyway, let's see. In an AP interview, George Lucas, he said, ultimately, I'm probably going to move it to television and let other people take it. I'm sort of preserving the feature film for what happened and never go there again. But I can go in various offshoots of things. You know, I've got offshoot novels. I've got offshoot comics. That's what he says, I've got them. He says, so it's very easy to say, well, okay, that's the genre, and I'll find a really talented person to take it and create it. Just like the comic books and the novels or somebody else's way of doing it. I don't mind that. Some of it might turn out to be pretty good. If we get the right people involved, it could be pretty interesting. He's very positive about the expanded universe, and, you know, but all they can think about is the Starlog quote. What about this Lucas story group? I'm hearing great things. What a great idea by Disney to make a story group. They must not have any idea what Leland Chee's job was before Disney bought them, which was to make sure everything was in continuity. But if you don't believe me, let's look at the Star Wars Insider, number 59, June 2002. It says the idea, licensing deal with Bantam, was passed to George Lucas, who agreed that licensing could expand upon the films with original fiction set after Return of the Jedi. Now the prequel stuff was off limits, because George always felt like he wanted to go back and do the prequels. But he had no plans for the rest of it, so go ahead, tell the stories. Just like the stories he said in the Los Angeles Times have already been told through the books, the comics, and the video games. May 2008. Anyway, it says, in the early days of publishing department, Wilson worked closely with her administrative assistant, Sue Rustoni, now managing editor of the department as well as editor of the adult fiction, on editorial projects. The two of them decided that to maintain quality, it would be crucial to monitor the storylines of all projects to ensure that none of their books contradicted one another. This continuity decision became one of the department's biggest challenges and greatest successes. And I agree with that. It sure did. One last quote. This is my favorite, which is why I saved it to last. Michael Stackpole, November 1999, on the Force.net interview. They were interviewing about the New Jedi Order, what he thought about it, how it was going. This is back in the early days. And what about the reactions to R.A. Salvatore and the Vong, that the people didn't like the Vong. They thought they were stupid. They thought living outside the Force was dumb. They didn't like Chewbacca dying. They didn't like anything about it. They didn't like it because it was too dark. What did he have to say to them? Are you ready? He said, Stackpole says, the reaction and attacks on Bob Salvatore have stunned me. Had I known what sort of ill-mannered responses his work would get, I would have told him to run away. He felt really bad for what the fans were saying about Salvatore. He said, I kind of feel betrayed here, and I have to wonder what sort of nonsense will go on with my New Jedi Order books. Well, a lot of nonsense, Michael. That's what went on. Ready? Best part of the quote. He said, if you want safe stories puked out that doesn't make you think, go read Star Trek or some other series. Love it. He says, Star Wars has a depth and strength to allow for really dynamic stories. If those are not your taste, stop reading those stories. All the writers are doing their best to turn out great stories, and I think the stories will be fun. I think this series will be full of them. He said it's funny. On one hand, writers will be criticized for having a cadre of safe characters who can't die. Readers say it makes the stories boring. Then we turn around and make everyone fair game, and they don't like that. The key is writing the best story we can and doing what we have to do to make it the best. I'm not going to compromise my standards of storytelling because I'll make someone nervous. I love it. He just moved up to my second favorite Star Wars author ever with that quote. He's exactly right. He's not going to compromise. So you didn't like it. All right, fine. Go read something else. That is fine. You don't have to like it. But these were good stories. They had a lot of depth to them. They had a lot of meaning. They didn't insult your intelligence. They put everyone on the chopping block. People didn't like that. People didn't like the Vong. I don't like that idea. Came from Zong. I don't like that idea, though. That's not part of my, canon. That's fine. But you know what? Stackpole says, yeah, go read something else. Because he's not going to compromise. He's going to write the best stories. He has high standards. That's why we love the expanded universe. That's why we don't want it to end. And it will end. When they stop telling stories, that's it. That's the end. I don't want a Frankenstein bit of pieces pulled out of the story. I want the full story. Anyway, folks, I hope you or someone you know is attending DragonCon, because I just got the news I am going to be speaking on a panel. Now, it's about collecting, but they said I could talk about whatever I want, so you better believe I'm going to talk a little bit about the expanded universe if I can. So if you're going, or anyone that you know is going, please pass the message along. I'd love to see them there. My panel will be Saturday at 11:30 in the Star Wars Fan Tracks room. You can find that on the map there. Folks, that's all I have for this week. We'll see you next week. What should we talk about? I have an idea.